Hello, good people. I'm John Munitz.
And I'm Jackie Sawicki, and we're the People's Basics.
Today on the program, we're breaking down yet another societal basic and all the challenges we got to address to secure it for all the people. Jackie, want to let the good people out there know what today's topic is?
Sure, John. Today we're going to be talking about freedom, justice, and security, specifically with a focus on justice.
Yeah, so I want to remind the folks out there before we get into today's episode, if you want to support the People's Basics Network, please make sure you leave a like on today's video or podcast, as well as making sure that you're subscribed to our content going forward so that you know whenever new content is being released beyond our podcast as well. Without that being said, I wanted to ask you, Jackie, justice. It can mean so much to so many people. How do you try to personally define justice in your own view?
Justice means being fair. Like, I've been obsessed with fairness my whole life. When I was little, I couldn't pick a favorite stuffed animal, so I slept with all of them. Like, it's about being fair. It's about giving people what they deserve, and one of that is just you deserve respect because you're human, and a lot of other stuff. So justice is just being respectful, and equality, that's a whole nother can of worms, but yeah, justice.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think the term of what even fairness means can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I think that is inherently what it is doing. It's trying to take a situation which might be unfair today and try to rectify it into a situation that is more fair going forward. So in my opinion, the reason why it's part of freedom, justice, and security, the reason why we talk through all three of those values is because it's a balancing act. Usually the way I see justice is it's the way you try to make a determination between freedom and security, or even freedom and freedom, or security and security. It's what is the fair outcome that assures that people are getting what they deserve at the end of the day. And so obviously certain subjects come first in mind when you mention justice. Obviously we have our criminal justice system, but I think there's some other several topics that we'd like to talk through today, including things like immigration, environmental justice, economic justice, racial and all identity-based forms of justice, making sure that we have peace and taking care of those who are protecting us at home after they've served in our military. And then finally, like making sure that all of our corporations are fairly treating their communities as well. So I think the first one I'd like to talk about is just like, what are some of the issues that you have currently been seeing with the system is the criminal justice system. So what are some of the things that you think we need to be putting a bigger focus on? I think in this episode, compared to some of our other ones, there's so many different aspects of this that we're not going to be doing a deep dive into each single bucket. But I just wanted to hear generally, what are some of the things that you think are important that we make sure that we do and rectify in our criminal justice system?
Well, when you see me tweeting, justice will almost always be with quotation marks, because we don't have a fair and equitable justice system. We have separate and unequal justice system. So if you can afford good lawyers, you're more likely to get lesser sentencing. We know there's racial discrimination in the justice system. We know that police are kind of above the law when it comes to abuse. There's so many reforms, and just I am a fan of defund, because they are doing a lot of stuff that maybe is out of their expertise. So with justice, criminal justice, so I mean, the war on drugs is our drugs. And this goes back to our freedom. If it's not hurting anyone else, why are you being thrown in a cage, separated from your family, marked as a second-class citizen for the rest of your life for a non-violent, something that's not harming any other person. So the criminal justice system has a lot to be desired. We have a long way to go, and we got to keep our eyes on the prize because power doesn't concede willingly.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the real aspect of justice that the criminal justice system is supposed to bring is twofold. One, it is an enforcement of our law. It is supposed to be doing a service of saying, hey, we might not have necessarily discrimination in the law. We do, but even if that were the case where we did not have discrimination within the law, you can still have discrimination in how the law is enforced. A law is only as valuable as we're willing to enforce it. There's nothing that inherently says a law stops murder from happening. It doesn't. It happens every year. But it is the enforcement of that law that hopefully deters others from doing that. And it gives us the grounds to make the determination if that person should be separated. And so, justice obviously is justice so that you're not being victimized by the police, but it's justice from all people who would be victimizing you. And it's trying to make sure that we are being kept safe and that people can't harm others in the future. Because I think that's what fairness needs to take into more account is when we take these people from society and put them in a cage, is that doing the best for society? Would that society not be better off with that person being able to contribute to them further, potentially? That's the determination we need to make. And so I agree with your sentiment that we need to end mass incarceration and that we need to do, frankly, I don't know if defund is the right word, but the sentiment is correct.
Yeah.
We need to unburden the police from doing all these jobs that they're not properly equipped to do. I think that's my main thing when it comes to criminal justice. And I think it fundamentally comes down to it's victimization. And so some of the things that we currently arrest people and take away their freedoms for today, like, for instance, drug use, like, for instance, sex work, things that are these consensual activities, the bodily autonomy of what we want to put inside of ourselves. We're not harming anyone else, hypothetically, by just ingesting it. Yet we throw people away for those simple actions. And I think that's not justice because we're not solving a wrong that has happened. Do you have other feelings in the criminal justice system that you think we need to address?
This is going to sound like totally out of left field, but it's something that bothers me to this day. When I watch the Netflix documentary Filthy Rich on Epstein, the police knew what Epstein was doing for years, for a long time, for like over a decade. They knew. And he got a slap on the wrist for just his charge that he actually went to jail for the first time around, which if he had actually had served real justice, he would have been prevented from victimizing a whole nother slew of women if that first time around he actually was served justice. But he got rich people justice, which is to say, all of his victims, and the police knew.
It's kind of interesting because, it does bring up the whole idea of, is the criminal justice system inherently racist, classist, or both? I generally go with both. But I think when you look at the inherent law and not necessarily the application of law enforcement, the actual law, you actually start to see some classism develop. The way I bring this point up is think about how we administer a lot of fines, as well as how we assure that people aren't often flight risks when they're arrested. We do it usually through flat fines or fines that are adjusted to the caliber of a crime that are also still a flat fine that doesn't determine that doesn't factor in how much income you have. So if a crime is very affordable to a rich person because it's a flat amount, they're going to pay it off and they're not going to care that they committed that crime. They didn't take any much of a burden from doing it. But a poor person who commits that same act, they're going to really feel that burden. And so that's how, in my opinion, the law itself shows classism because it doesn't actually deliver the same level of penalty to each party.
Yeah, I mean, just calling it a white collar crime, people are harmed in those.
Yeah.
In people lose everything in white collar crimes, but the people who commit them are usually sent to, a luxury jail that's separate, again, separate and unequal.
Yeah, and I also think about a large extent of like recidivism too, and I think this is the last point I want to make on this before we move on to immigration. But recidivism is a real big problem in our justice, because if you think about it, they're trying to get what they think is fair to them often, which is just try to get some basic economic stability. Obviously, not every form of crime is that, but when you look at recidivism, a large portion of why people do recidivism and go back to jail is economic. They struggle to be able to get jobs when they come out. They struggle to be able to get housing when they come out. And so
a lot of times they're not eligible. Yeah, a lot of times they're not eligible for from assistance from the state or government because they have that little checkbox ticked off. Yeah,
and often they have no vote to even try to change that in their system either. So I fully think that when it comes to justice, we're not doing justice for the people who have now served their time too. And when you also think about it as a fact of like, well, look at all the economic pain we've made these people to go through during this period of time where they couldn't make any money, and they're still needing to do work to pay for some services and goods within the prison system. They're not even being paid a normal minimum wage either while they're in there. They're still being paid basically pennies on the dollar of the minimum wage because that's part of an allowance from our 13th Amendment. And so I feel like justice is not just the people who have been victimized that need to take action to put these people away, but it's also after these people have served their time, what is the justice to get them back incorporated into society so they don't feel like in order to get a guarantee of housing and a guarantee of food, they have to commit crime to go into the prison system.
Because there are so little options.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's now go to our next part of justice. You know, we talked about criminal justice, but the immigration system kind of has similar elements. So, you know, right now we classify illegal immigration as a criminal offense. It's not just a civil penalty with a fine. It is something that can get you locked up for the occurrence. And likewise, it also involves our refugee system, which is people who are trying to flee unsafe situations, try to get a fair life of somewhere where they can get safe refuge. And so I wanted to hear, in your opinion, in terms of doing justice for our immigration system, what are some of the things that come to your mind?
I mean, immediately the word that comes to mind is hypocrisy. We tell the world how amazing we are, and we open our arms. You know, we're the melting pot. Diversity is what makes us so unique, what creates all the innovation that we're so proud of. And yet, when certain people come, you know, it's not just all immigrants. We have a fonder disposition towards some than we do others. And what do we call that? It's called racism. So, you know, people were literally children coming from the murder capitals of the world. Down here in Texas, they were coming from Guatemala, El Salvador, just some of the most dangerous places where, because of the drug war. Let's also talk about our involvement in our fertilization of the cartels and stuff because of our stupid laws. And we sell them our guns in Texas. I mean, people can just cross the border, go to the gun shows. There's a giant billboard for gun shows all the time. They take it they've done studies where a lot of the guns come from Texas and Arizona gun shows. And these people are coming from extremely dangerous situations that we as Americans helped create. They are coming here for help in desperation, and we tell them no, when it's partly our fault that they're coming from these situations to begin with, and we are so inhumane. It's just That's not something to be proud of as an American, how we treat immigrants from the South. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for myself, some of the justice that comes to my mind when it comes to immigration is the justice to make it easy to be able to obtain security while maintaining the fairness to actually follow a process and to do fairness to the people that are already here, to know new people are coming in. We should have that proper screening. But the thing is, which bothers me so much, is why so many people just don't understand what the real, like, undocumented illegal immigrant experience is. Most who end up in that status came here legally. And all that happened is they overstayed their visa after developing a lifelong connection to this area, oftentimes. Maybe not even lifelong, but like several years, almost a decade at a time. And the simple fact of the matter is, because of the corporations that were supposed to be providing them sponsorship and our constant reliance on guest labor, people get kind of screwed over by the system and end up becoming illegal because, well, they were no longer useful to capital. But they developed these ties to the community, and we developed a system that makes immigrants' status in America so deeply tied to corporations that these corporations can just abuse them, like not just in terms of underpaying them sometimes, but also in labor rights too.
I've seen a documentary where they have where these corporations, like, again, what is justice? Why are we penalizing the small fries, the immigrants, the drug offenses, and we're not going after the big guns, which is the corporations who hire these people?
Yeah.
So I saw a documentary once where they have people come work on the farms and do the labor, and then when it comes time to pay them, they call immigration on them.
Yeah.
Like, how disgusting. And
yeah.
So that,
I mean, I think about it this way. Like, this is one of the areas where I can actually come to some bipartisan consensus with some of my conservative and Republican peers. I want to penalize people who hire illegally. I want to actually disincentivize this idea of, oh, Americans' wages are being undercut by illegal immigrants. Well, it's not going to be undercut if you actually penalize the companies that do that. And it's, again, like, you think about who has the legal recourse to properly try these cases. Is it the undocumented immigrant who's often not being paid particularly high wages? Or is it the corporation who's making profits off the backs of people who are not being paid high wages?
Yeah,
I think it's the corporations.
Yeah, and as Americans, we have to be honest. We don't want to pay the price for tomatoes that an actual free market, like a real market would. I mean, we are all benefiting from exploited, illegal. I don't even like calling it illegal immigrants, because it's like they came here. Most of them, I'm not like making generalizations, but like, they work, they contribute, they want to be a functioning part of the society. We should not penalize people for actually contributing. And
And I mean, the thing is, it's like you do have like different circumstances. It's like some of these people who we were mentioning that just like overstayed their visas. They've been here for a while. These are people who like should not have this demonization of being treated like criminals. And we should have a clear pathway to citizenship that doesn't rely on these people needing to be sponsored by companies or here just for university. We should be having a system that allows them to be truly independently here. But I also will say the people that do cross the border actually illegally, there should be some stopping there. There is a demand for us to try and stop the illegal flow of drugs and sex trafficking and other forms of crime. And so I can respect that people want to have security at the border, but I also think we need to understand how large of a percentage of the people who are considered illegal were just trying to follow the law, and now the system is so inherently broken that it's made them overstay. And They just don't want to be separated from their communities that they've been here for most of their life. So it is one of those balancing acts. And so that is why fundamentally it's justice, because it is trying to establish fairness. And there is a balancing process here.
Yeah, my mom is a conservative, and she says, I don't mind people coming. They just need to do it the right way. And I said, well, you helped a certain person get their citizenship, correct? Yes. How was that experience? She had to go to immigration every single day, literally every single day for a year. So she says, I want you to do that the right way. Well, you're trying to escape, again, from the South. I'm in Texas, so like that's what I kind of think of as like these people that were just harassing and incarcerating when they're coming here at their most defenseless and vulnerable and desperate in need. And we say, well, you should do this the right way. You should get out of your murderous country the right way. Like, and the right way is going to an immigration office every single day for a year. It's absurd and it's offensive.
Yeah. I totally hear you. Like, it is truly a nightmarish process for so many of these people that it needs streamlining. It needs immediate action so that people are no longer in these limbo situations. But then it also needs the action to say, like, hey, let's get you into full citizenship status as quickly as we possibly can. But I wanted to now move into our next subject, which is environmental justice. I think that this is a kind of a tangentially related subject, because I generally see this as related because of, well, climate migration. We're in an increasingly volatile world of climate that particularly has impacts on global warming too, that is making certain areas around the equator a lot more volatile to try and live in. And so this generally has impacted South American, African, even Southeast Asian countries to migrate to other countries as refugees often. But it also impacts many poor communities too. And so, Jackie, as I lead with each of these topics, I want to hear, in your opinion, what do you think justice really looks like when it comes to our environment?
I think if people understood the harm that goes into a lot of the products, and we're talking about environmental justice, a lot of the products that they use, consume, and throw away, if they understood the environmental and health impacts of where those things come from and where they go, we need change. We need education and enlightenment. We need change, because there's a whole segment of racial justice called environmental justice, because a lot of times dumps, CAFOs, which are concentrated animal feeding operations, which we call, factory farms. These are some of the most dangerous, carcinogenic, polluting entities are situated in rural areas, in poor areas, and in areas where people of color live. And they call them cancer alleys. I mean, certain places are just, and you can't just leave, you can't just pick up and go, because so they're put there, and these people have to live with polluted water. I mean, we're talking about Flint, Michigan too. They have lead in their water, and how long has it been going on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the big thing that I see about this, and I think a lot of justice issues generally have this kind of very intersectional nature to them. To me, one of the things that this reminds me of is this inherent, like, economic vicious cycle trap that we create because of our environment. Very often, if you think about it, areas with more pollution are generally going to be less demanded. It's going to be lower price areas. And so usually that means only poor people can afford those areas. And in turn, as you were just describing, very often people will get sick more often in those areas because of that. And because they're getting sick more often, that's leading them to have higher expenses, which in turn leads them to not be able to afford that many places, which leads them to have to kind of stay in this poor area. And then you think about it on the dumping end too. If you're thinking about, well, where is my dumping going to do the most damage? You think about property damage. Well, if something's worth a lot, it can be potentially damaged more than a poor area. And so what happens is we have this constant cycle of, well, this area keeps staying poor because it has poor health and it's already been polluted. And so where should we throw our pollution? Oh, let's throw it there where we don't do as much damage. And so I see this very vicious cycle. It comes from, like, in the past, we had done like lead in our paints. Now we have lead in our drinking water. We now are having people, frankly, who are now being displaced from their homes because of rising tides. I see this as, frankly, much more of an issue of a little bit more of an issue of economics than it is on racial lines. But then the economics is always intertwined with racial dynamics too. And there is clearly racial wealth inequality in America. And that in turn makes the environmental injustice, I think, also racial in nature. I don't know if you have a differing opinion on if you think these areas are targeted because of that issue of race. But that's how I see it. It's more of an economic thing for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think if climate change was driving people from Sweden and Europe, would we care about it more as Americans, or it's happening in South America? So if it was happening to Israel, would we care? Like we have certain countries, certain people that we put on our top priority list, and there are other countries and other people where we're okay with them being super exploited, and we're okay with their countries just being devastated by climate change because it doesn't affect us and it doesn't affect our friends.
Yeah, and it's also like
it does
even
affect
when you're
us
trying to get the justice too. Like I know this personally from my own family's experience with trying to do like litigation on environmental justice. Like my mom's a pretty big local political activist on like land use stuff.
Yeah.
The barrier to trying to bring up these cases is so high. Like you think about it, as we were talking about before, so many of these impacted areas are just poor communities. And so if you're trying to get a poor community to be able to get the funds together to fight like a legal case to get like this group to stop polluting, it can be really hard. And not just like the economic cost too, but like then you think about the time cost of trying to actually like lead these cases of litigation against environmental discrimination. It is immensely difficult. And so it is a hard process for us to try and get resolution for on an individual basis, which is why we need such a societal act of justice from our legislators on through the EPA and many other justice departments on this matter.
Yeah, and a lot of times this has everything to do with, which we'll get to, corporate and political accountability, because it's not mom and pops who are destroying, the earth. It's like corporations. The U.S. military is one of the biggest fossil fuel consumers. It's industrial agriculture. These aren't, small time. These aren't small fries. They're the big guys, and like that's why we are so far along as we are, because it's so hard to hold the big guys accountable.
Yeah, and I'd love to ask you this question because of your own experience now working as a farmer. Obviously, agriculture is a huge part of the environmental justice movement on a variety of levels. One from the more like animal rights groups, if they say should there be justice when it comes to animals, and I know you're a big plant-based person, so you'll have feelings there. But then you also have the justice of like. Are there pesticides being used? Are there GMOs being used? And do we have proper disclosure to consumers? And do we have potentially GMOs infecting other farmers' crops from these big groups like Monsanto?
Yeah, and then they get
talk
sued.
Through some of the. Yeah, I was going to say, could you talk through, in your perspective, some of the things that you think are needed as justice within agriculture?
Yeah, I like to say that we as farmers, our entire existence is an act of rebellion. It's a protest. Like everything we do on the farm is a big middle finger to the people that are doing everything the wrong way. So we do what's called permaculture, and it's like sort of regenerative farming. We don't use pesticides. We don't use synthetic fertilizers. We kind of backed up. When I first got into it, we did animal stuff, like chickens and eggs and good stuff like that. We're more of a rescue now. We're a sanctuary. We're a no kill, so that means like we try not to even kill bugs. And you put more in, than you try to get out. It's all about like appreciating what nature has to offer, and when we just let Mother Nature do her thing, there's plenty for all of us. Like abundance is real. It's real. We can have it. So I am really worried about pesticides. We had beehives, and I'm pretty sure like we lost one of our beehives because of neighbor spray. So bees can go about 3-mile radius. So if anybody in my area is spraying their yard with God knows what, I lose my bees. So there's that. I mean, and bees aren't the only one. I mean, it's a cascade effect too. Like we don't understand how totally dependent we are on nature. Like there is no money, there's no economic justice, there's no social justice unless there's a planet. And this is like one of just the things that's just really driving me nuts right now is like we should be totally focused on all these things that are happening, but like global warming is real. It's real, and we really need to take it seriously. And this is justice on a global scale. We need justice on a global scale when it comes to global climate change.
Yeah, and the last point I want to make on justice for the environment before we move on is, justice, as we talked about inherently, is about fairness. And I ask, is it fair to my generation and generations younger than I to have this planet increasingly become more and more uninhabitable and more volatile because we wish to have short-term gains in the present? I don't think that's fair at all, personally. And I think it is our responsibility to be trying to leave a world that is equal at a bare minimum for future generations, if not better.
As a Girl Scout,
we're failing them on that.
Yeah, as a Girl Scout, you're taught to leave the campsite better than you found it, and that's like what we should all believe as our life. Like you should leave the planet better than you got here, and we're not doing that. We're failing. Like we're failing.
Yeah, we're failing. We're failing big time on that, and I think this directly intertwines with what we were talking about before on the economy and how so many of these justice topics are so intersectional. I wanted to talk to you now about like what really needs to be done in terms of justice on the economy and bringing like accountability to corporations and frankly politicians for the economic state that we are currently in. What do you see as the main issues that make our economy so unfair currently?
I mean, I'm really not like super versed in taxes, but I think taxing people. Oh God, now I can't even think of the word. Payroll tax, like taxing your labor. Like you want people to work, but then you like penalize them for doing so. You like UBI would go a long way in securing economic justice for all Americans. When we talk about corporate accountability, there's no such thing in this country. So we can start there, like holding, in the 2008 crash, nobody went to jail. Those people got away with it. And the too big to fail are even bigger now. So it's pretty grim when you ask me, like, what are we going to do about economic justice? It's almost overwhelming, but that's what we're doing. That's what we're here for, right? That's what we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it comes down to a couple things. The first form of justice is, in my mind, just can people have the basics of life? I think a basic act of fairness is that we try to make sure everyone has the basics of life, as we've said, things like healthcare, things like housing, things like food and clean water, etc. And right now, so many people don't have these fundamental basics, while others are living in the opulence that many could not imagine achieving in hundreds of lifetimes. To the point where it's not just a problem of this disparity, but an inherent system that is rigged for that. And I think your point about taxation is very apt. And I think about it in multiple ways. One, in terms of marginal rates of income taxation, we now have the wealthy paying an effective tax rate for the first time in like 5 decades, a lower tax rate than the poor. The rich are paying literally less right now than the poor. And furthermore, it's not just on an individual level, it's on a corporate level too. It comes in the fact that when you look at, let's just say, the most recent Trump tax bill, they basically said the corporate tax rate used to kind of be like income tax rate, where as you were making more income, the marginal rate would increase over time, known as a progressive tax scale. What Trump did during his administration is he consolidated all corporate taxes into one rate. And what this did was it increased the taxes on small businesses and it lowered the taxes on large businesses. And furthermore, they're not even paying their taxes as is. We have hundreds of national federal companies who are avoiding paying any form of national tax on corporate taxes because of simple deductions that they've been able to have, as well as corporate inversion, where they basically take the money they have here and say it was recognized income in some other country that doesn't pay those corporate taxes. And
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
yes, the
let's
tax
never
code is
forget.
inherently so unfair.
Yeah. Yeah, we all paid more taxes than Donald Trump did.
Yeah,
Remember that?
and you think about it this way too. Like, it's not just the effective rates too. It is, what do we allow deductions to have? We have deductions for private planes and for frickin' yachts. We have deductions for owning mortgages on homes, but we have no deductions for rent. The tax code is inherently set up to reward property owners and to inherently penalize people who need to subsist through rent and through just income. It inherently penalizes these forms. But then there's the other aspect too. It's not just all, oh, it's taxes. That's certainly a part of it. But there's also the fact that, like, often you have companies who are literally just trying to take advantage in a manipulative manner. They're like consumers. We've seen that from our president and his own private universities, but we've seen this many a time since we created the CFPB during the Dodd-Frank Act. The CFPB, for those that don't know the abbreviation, is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it's basically an organization that investigates claims of essentially like fraud or corporate malfeasance that has produced tens of billions in rectifications of fines over time to these corporate entities. So I think it is an interesting thing to note, like, so many companies basically take this approach to operating where they will, privatize the profits and they will externalize the cost to society. And I wanted to understand, in your opinion, like, how do you feel about generally like a quote unquote free market? Like,
Well, I mean,
what does that really mean to you? Is it a free market if you're being taken advantage of by different companies? Like,
dude, think about this Texas storm. People were losing power. They were without power. They lost water, and then they get an electricity bill for $7,000 because, and then they had a leaked audio of one of the power electric company CEOs saying it's like hitting the jackpot because demand, right? So there was so much demand, and then the free market means they can just ratchet up that price, the price, and just totally exploit people at their most vulnerable. It's so gross. Like, I'm so grossed out by the free market. So I always say, if you take it the free market, like a true free market, really like their wet dream, you guys, we would still have slavery and child labor. The only reason that there isn't still slavery and child labor is because people fought against it. If the market had its way, if capitalists, I'm sorry, I know we're not on the same page about this one, but if capitalists, really people who honestly what they cared about is the bottom line, which is most of the corporations and the businesses that are super successful in this country, that's what they care about. You're going to see exploitation somewhere along the line. Like, what is it? Slavoj Zizek says, there's no ethical consumption in capitalism, because somewhere along the line, someone's being exploited. Be it in the environmental pollution, be it in the exploitation of, like women's products. There's the pink tax.
Yeah.
I'm yelling. But being a woman is even more expensive than being a man, because they think that we'll pay more. So, haha, tricks on them. I don't use none of it. No, but there's so many different ways that they exploit and take advantage in any way they can. And that's also talking about cutting corners. Remember the Deepwater Horizon oil spill was because they cut corners, because they were trying to be cheap, and it cost the planet untold amounts of money and life, sea life, human life, the economic ramifications of the Gulf, all of that stuff. And so, corporations in the free market, they get a pass, they make the rules, they like literally write the laws like Alec does, and we're the ones left holding the bags. The super rich have luxury bunkers, they have yachts, they have spaceships. They're going to be fun. It's you and me that are going to be holding the bag when the fucking shit drops. So how do I feel about the free market? Like that. That's how I feel about it, pretty much.
I mean, we do have minor disagreements on the overall potential of capitalism, but I don't disagree inherently with how it largely operates today, how you described. I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about when it came to economic justice, because as I said, so many of these things are intersectional and will impact the economy too. But something specific is something that's been happening recently. And the time in which we're recording this is March 6th, for those that are wondering. They had recently wrapped up conversations about the minimum wage and having votes on that and whether it should be included in the stimulus bill. One thing that comes to my mind in terms of just like economic justice is two things. One, the ridiculous pay ratio that has occurred in America, from roughly a ratio of 30-1 back in the 60s to now a ratio closer to 300-1 in the 2010s. And then secondly, they're talking about like the minimum wage as if everyone who is currently at that minimum wage is even getting paid technically that. We have what's known very commonly as wage theft. It is a big problem in America, costing roughly annually around $60 billion each year. And it could definitely be larger than that, because the number that I'm citing is from roughly the last economic crisis around 2009. So this level of wage theft often is leading to people who are supposedly making minimum wage still not even getting paid that minimum. And so I think a lot of people who are opposing raising the wage don't understand that people who are even getting the minimum wage aren't getting a freaking living wage, because they still have to fight off their employer trying to steal from them through misclassifications, through like deductions, from just flat out like full on wage theft. Like there are so many ways that people try to get away with this. And so I think that is another form of economic justice that needs to be included. And I think this is also very related to racial justice too, which is the next thing I wanted to talk about, because if you think about who are the people who work these minimum wage jobs right now, more often than not, they are people of color. And so I wanted to hear in your mind, obviously that is one part, economics, we've been mentioning along the way, and we've clearly mentioned it in regards to the criminal justice and immigration system. But is there anything else that you think we need to be trying to address when it comes to like racial or identity-based factors when it comes to justice?
It does go back to economics, but they've done studies that show Black people will get a higher interest rate on a loan when their white counterpart will get a better interest rate, even if they have the same credit scores. Or people with ethnic sounding names getting their resume rejected when they use a very vanilla name. They've done studies where like they submit the same exact resume, one with the ethnic sounding name, one with a Caucasian sounding name. I don't know how you would say it, but and the ethnic sounding name doesn't get the callbacks. I personally worked at a place and the guy walked in wearing a turban and he gave an application, and as soon as he walked out, my manager, white manager, threw, this is going to be so offensive, but threw the resume in the trash and said, I'm not hiring a racial epithet. So like that exists, that's real, that's still totally happening. Even just having an accent, you're considered less smart. Like people react to you differently. And humans, there's a reason why our eyes are so big. We are very superficial. It has helped us evolve and survive. But we have to recognize our own inherent bias and like combat it, because we all are biased. And there's a really great Harvard self-test quiz that you can take. It's like very quick. You just like gut react, and it kind of tells you what biases you subconsciously have. So I recommend everybody trying that, because we do have it, and the only way we're going to get justice for people of color is if we ourselves are honest with ourselves that we do have inherent bias, and then constantly combat that in ourselves and in the systems that we work with. So somebody says something like that, we have to counter that. We can't just be silent when someone treats people differently because of their race or gender or identification, any of that stuff. Like, again, this is our one life. This is our bodies, our experience. So we should just try to be kind as much as we can, because everybody's human. We're all human.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point on the economic justice point we were talking about beforehand, of redlining, systematically saying these, frankly, communities of color, more often than not Black communities, are being systematically, economically discriminated. And because these are also generally poor areas too, it's a double whammy. It is systematically making it more difficult, even if they wanted to interact on their own, to be able to support themselves. It's like draining their communities by charging them higher fees, and it's pumping that into other communities. So I think you're absolutely right in that regard. I think it's also just like it comes down to just standardization of processes in general. Like, I just frankly think a lot of our systems, when they allow too much, frankly, freedom, when you allow too much freedom, you end up causing the ability to freely discriminate.
Sure.
And that is unfair inherently. And so I think about very often, like, a lot of how we even do like welfare in America too. Inherently, it's a system that forces you to do these applications and spend this time trying to make yourself eligible.
Yeah.
And it inherently causes many people to fall through the cracks. Yeah. And then on top of it, it's this very paternalistic system that says, we know what you need. You're going to take this bare minimum, and you're going to be trapped into the system because you're going to be naturally disincentivized from working because you lose your benefits as soon as you start making income. And when you think about these systems initially, the way they were initially designed originally excluded a lot of these groups, like communities of color. Like when you look up like FDR's record with the New Deal, very often most of those jobs programs, especially like jobs programs where you only have a finite amount of positions, they ended up going, when you're talking about like the Tennessee Housing Authority, like they mainly went to white people. And so when you, or sorry, not the Tennessee Housing Authority, the Tennessee Valley Authority. But yeah, it mainly went to white people. And so whenever people try to bring up jobs programs as the way we recover, or these means tested programs, I always think all you're doing is creating the ability to discriminate and send benefits to one community over another. And so I think we need a lot more standardization and a lot more universalism in the systems, because I think we've covered a lot of other racial and identity-based justice issues that kind of interrelate with all these other forms of justice.
Yeah.
But I think inherently it's just that we allow discrimination in the system by trying to be extra targeted in how we try to help.
Because we're so scared somebody that doesn't deserve it is going to get it. And we let all these people through. And when you talk about standardization, you know, the first thing that popped up into my head is education districts. So that's another way that we keep people separate. It's still separate. It's still unequal. I came from a very poor neighborhood. The schools were not great. It was, and then I came to a more affluent area where there were more white people and rich people, and the education was a completely different experience. I mean, I went from being in advanced classes to being in remedial classes. That's how different the systems still are. And also when you talked about taking time to jump through these hoops. So my mom has been on unemployment because she was doing gig work as a retired on Social Security. It wasn't enough, so she was still working gig work. She was grocery shopping for people. Well, you know that unemployment and insurance has been going on and off, and so she's been on the phone with them forever. And the other day she told me, I was on the phone with these people for 6 hours. I said, now imagine that you weren't retired, that you had a full-time job, and that you had kids to raise. How the hell would you have been able to do that? And she's like, you're right, I wouldn't have been able to. So that's another way that we leave a lot of people out. It just, why can't we have these universal streamlines? I mean,
Yeah, and then I also think, like, we've been talking about like racial, but like for other forms of identity justice, like I think about like there are definitely issues for both men and women, but I'd like to call out some for women in particular that I think are relevant to some of the ongoing crises that we've had. It is the brunt of domestic labor that falls onto their shoulders without any form of compensation. Yeah. And so when you've looked at the job losses from the pandemic, most of the people who volunteered to leave the workforce to handle childcare responsibilities were women. And this often delays their careers very often from advancing because they had to take time out. And so the promotions that they might have been working towards end up going to someone else, often men, because they were the people who got to stay in the workforce. And so this inherently is what leads to a large amount of the gender gap, is that there is this expectation of women taking more time to lead the household in which they get no pay. And so then in any circumstance where there needs to be a split, we have this notion of like, oh, men just get railroaded in divorce. Well, no, it's like there's this societal expectation that women have been foregoing some form of income over time, often for child rearing duties, homekeeper duties, etc., that leads them to not making as much over time, which then in turn, when you're trying to equitably split, you're trying to compensate for that disparity. And so that's something that I wanted to call out. I'm sure there are other things. Jackie, is there anything you wanted to call out as like justice for women before I talk about some things that I think men also could use help with?
Sure. I mean, when we talk about justice for women, this is one of the things that really resonated. I loved Yang. I've been talking about UBI since the '08 crash because, again, like justice is economic justice is like not letting millions of people lose their home when it's not their fault. Okay, so let's just start there. So then when Andrew Yang talks about women in abusive relationships who are dependent on their abusers and how hard it is, and that's one of the major roadblocks. Well, why didn't she just leave? Where's she supposed to go? How's she supposed to survive? So that's one thing. And then also I want to talk about the mental load. And there's a really great article. It's called "The Invisible Labor Falling on Women's Shoulders." And the mental load, they say, is anticipating needs, identifying options, fulfilling them, making decisions, monitoring processes. Women, a lot of times in relationships, in the family, they're like managers of the family. There is so much work that they do physically and then also mentally that like isn't recognized. So that's really important to like recognize and like and compensate women for the like so much labor that we do. You know, even I mean, oh my God, being a parent in the COVID times, I can't imagine. Like, and a lot of it is falling on. And look, dads are doing amazing too, and it's so awesome. But like for the most part, what was that statistic? 90% of the unemployment in December was women.
Yeah.
Did I get that right? I mean,
I'm not sure on the specific statistic, but I do recall that when we were talking about the December job numbers, that it was something like 100% of the net job loss was from women. So yeah, I certainly hear you there. I would like to just call up because I do think, frankly, men don't often get our issues raised. I'd like to just call a couple things into attention. I think, frankly, in large part, a lot of our issues stem from how we handle drugs and the criminal justice system in general. Men generally are more naturally inclined for drug use as well as other behaviors that are traditionally thought of as higher risk behavior. And so often our criminal justice system, seeing men as inherently as these risky threats, are more likely to use force against us and are more likely to give us harsher sentences when they put us into the prison system. And so in turn, we are fundamentally being stripped from society at record numbers, and we're the ones who face most of the burden of the prison system. Now, mind you, this is starting to change, and not necessarily for a good reason, mainly because a lot in the past decade has been a major increase in the number of arrests of women too. But there is a large gap there. And furthermore, when we talk about drugs, it's not just the drugs that we currently consider illegal. We're talking about the legal things too. The prescription drugs, especially opioids, are devastating men particularly. And when you think about a lot of these like Midwestern areas that kind of faced a lot of automation and job loss, that especially devastated men because, well, like we said, women traditionally have a little bit more association of home caring and non-traditional workforce. Men have very traditionally been defined by our job. That is like our livelihood and our essence of how we're defined. And so when people lose that, they lose so much of their identity and they fall into these real big cycles of despair. And there's been a ton of research. When people become unemployed, men tend to be the ones who fall into depression and drug use much higher during those events. And so those are some of the things that if you want to help men, we have to start addressing the opioid crisis, and we have to start making our criminal justice system more humane and arresting less people in general. So that's generally what I thought. Do you have anything you wanted to add for things for men or women?
I keep going back to 2008 because I feel like it was a huge missed opportunity. Like we could have done some great things. We could have had like a Green New Deal where we were putting solar panels. We could have put people to work. We could have had, a Green New Deal. That's what Obama sort of ran on. He talked about it. So I feel like '08 really was a precipice that a lot of people fell off and never recovered. or they're just struggling even still. And so we're looking, it's like deja vu all over again, where we're in this situation and it's like, hey, there are things we could be doing right now to like help people. And this, piddly debating on if we should give people money or not, like give people money, give people jobs, increase the minimum wage, tax rich people so that they can contribute. Like this is, we're in an emergency. And then you put global climate change on top of it. Like this is not a drill. Like we should be like so much more, we should be so much more concerned than we are right now. Like there are the K shape, right? Like I'm one of it. I'm very, very lucky. We were hardly at all affected by COVID. I've been working from home for 10 years before it. So it was no change in our lifestyle, but we're lucky. And there before the grace of God go I, right? We're supposed to say, I'm lucky. Let's help the people who aren't as lucky. Yeah. And all those fucking millionaires in Congress are dragging their feet, and not one Republican voted for the stimulus to help out the struggling, like millions of struggling people. People can't fucking feed their kids, and they can't vote for that. Unacceptable.
Yeah. I hear you there. I think the last identity-based call-outs for justice that I wanted to make mention of before we go to our final topic before our interview is two groups. One is on gender identity. We did a nice breakdown with guest Polana Belkin about more issues for that community if you want to go check it out. But the transgender community largely faces a lot of discrimination and suffering in general that I think deserves being called out. Especially they face a lot of violence. Yeah. So I feel like that deserves calling out. And then the second thing is, frankly, both Jews and Muslims. There has been a large rise in hate crimes for both groups. And I don't even mean necessarily just in America, like even worldwide, we have like persecution of Muslims in the Palestinian population, as well as in China with the Uyghurs. Yeah. So I wanted to just say that like we shouldn't be persecuting on those lines as well. I think I don't have as much experience on those topics as some others to talk through all the issues, but if you want to hear more on the gender part, you can listen to Polana Belkin. But Jackie, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, this recent spat of recent increase in Asian hate crimes.
Yeah.
And let's Donald Trump incited violence against Asian Americans. He called it, we don't have to go over it, but like he totally stoked the xenophobic claims, and we're totally seeing the repercussions of that right now. So you want to talk about justice? Can somebody please put that man in jail, please?
Oh, God.
I know it's asking a lot, but
I mean, hey, we're gonna talk on that with our guest Richard. But Jackie, I think I want to cover one final topic before we head into that conversation with Richard. The last form of justice to me is peace. It's not being at war, and it is taking care of our men and women who have served their lives trying to protect us. And I wanted to hear, in your opinion, if there is anything, and I'm certain there is, anything that we could be doing differently to create peace in the world.
John, you want to talk about economic justice. Talk about every bomb that's made is food being stolen from the mouth of babes. You want to talk about ecological justice. Again, the U.S. military is one of the biggest consumers of fossil fuels.
Oh, no, it is the biggest.
Immigration policy. We are driving people out of their countries because of the wars that we're committing against them. Go down the list. Economic, corporate, political accountability. What the fuck is that? We've been in the longest wars in American history. And there is, do you remember you remember the like no bid contracts. I mean, I remember when this started. I remember when Americans actually fucking gave a shit about being anti-war, and they had closed meetings with the energy companies. I mean, like, this is why I'm angry as always. This is why I'm AAA, because this fucking war stuff goes to every single criminal justice tick, immigration chick. I mean, it is everything, and I don't understand. I don't understand where our ethics and morals went. Like, I can't fucking stand that my tax dollars go to fucking harming other people. I lose sleep over this shit. I literally don't want to pay taxes because 50% of federal income taxes or federal taxes go towards the war machine. So, like, I don't want to contribute to that. I don't understand why more people aren't as angry as I am about it. It affects every single aspect of American life. And we've just been going about our fucking daily stuff because you want to talk about justice for the troops. They're a small, forgotten segment of our population that is giving so much. Every time I see one of those videos where they're reunions, I think about all the families who will never get their reunion. And that's the shit that fucking makes me so fucking angry, and like why I am screaming into the void every freaking day, because we've contributed to so much loss of life and so much damage, ecological, mental, physical, so much damage. The least we can do as Americans is acknowledge it, and we don't even do that.
Yeah, and I mean, just to make one minor correction, the only minor correction I'd say is, like, I still completely agree we spend too much on our military, 100%. It's not 50% though. It's like closer to like the 15 to 20% range.
It depends on if you're counting Medicare and stuff in there too, because like
I would be counting that personally, like as part of our federal spending.
But that's paid already. Like that's paid.
I get what you're coming from, but I consider that. But
how about
I digress. Let me go with the agreeing part.
0%.
Like, it's still too high, and I like to put it in terms of these numbers. Obviously, you cited we are the next 10 countries combined, but I like to try and put it in a little bit of a different perspective. If you look at our percent of the total world of economic production that America makes, we are 15% of the world's economy. But now, if you look at what our military spending is compared to the rest of the world, we constitute 38% of the world's military spending. That is significantly higher, 2.5 times higher than what we constitute as an economy. We spend, as we said, 10 nations combined in military spending. We could cut our military budget by 20% and fund literally education for every child forever, essentially, as well as a child UBI and universal child care, all for that 20%. So instead of bombing brown kids, we could go fucking educate them. I always think it's absurd to me how much we spend on freaking destruction. The whole idea is it's supposed to be providing security and trying to keep the wars from being at home. But all we're doing is creating more instability in the world, which is leading to these migration patterns of people trying to flee areas. Like, you think about especially like the Syria refugees, they were trying to leave there and come to here as well as other countries around the world because we decided to turn their area into a freaking quasi-war for many different superpowers. I frankly think so many of the national security threats are no longer military. Like, we talked about this on our most recent team stream that people can go check out. But like most of, in my opinion, the threats are coming from like climate change, as we were just talking about. It comes from technological threats. It comes from the general notion of internal country poverty. Like, there are so many different things, like misinformation. the military threat has become less and less over time. And we've had less and less war, but we keep having the military budget skyrocket. Like, if we are in a time of hypothetically more peace, how does that budget just keep on blowing up more and more? We don't have more threats to be addressing. We're just starting new conflicts.
Right. There's a book called Our Better Angels, and he illustrates how we're living like the safest time in human history. But yet,
a lot of that is the technology. Like, the simple idea of no longer having to do like hand-to-hand combat or having like infantry troops and ground troops all the time for war. Like, that is the main reason why we have less death tolls in war.
No, it's very
now
precise.
It's now just doing drone strikes, and sometimes hitting civilians, which is not just. Like, I remember reading this past week. I think it was a Politico article praising Joe Biden from not bombing an area because it was gonna hit civilians, and I'm like, well, shit. Like, I mean, like, we normally just do that anyway, and they're going to be bombing other people too, and it's still not with congressional authority. So I feel a fairness measure is by following the process and actually doing it in accordance to international law. And I think there's a lot that we could talk about with veterans care, but I think we talk about that largely with Richard at the end of our conversation. So I'd like to leave it there. But do you have any final thoughts that you want to share on the subject of justice from today's episode before we go talk to Richard?
I think if we really cared about justice and security and freedom, like I said in the earlier freedom video, it doesn't come with more prisons or more drones or more surveillance and wiretapping. It comes from having a just and equitable and stable environment. It comes with people having a roof over their head and enough to eat so they don't feel the desperation and that they need to do things outside the law in order to make a living. There are things, again, this is what I come back to all the time, it's stupid simple. There are things that we could be doing that would infinitely increase justice and freedom and security in this country. The question is, will the businesses allow us to do it? And so far, the answer's been no, because we know that UBI will keep people out of jail. We know UBI can free people from their abusive relationships. Why haven't we done it yet? If this is not a new concept. So, and prisons, I mean, prisons it's just the prison complex. Over half of the people in prison are there for non-violent drug offenses. And I highly recommend everybody checking out Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, and she talks about how our justice system has essentially created an entire second caste citizenry. Once you've been in the system, it's really hard to get out, and we just aren't doing really great by all of our people. And we could be doing more, and we have the technology and the information and the resources. So why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The solutions are known. It's now just building up the political will within DC and around the country to get them properly implemented. But everyone, that concludes our basic breakdown for the day on the subject of justice. But stay tuned after our commercial break that we got to do to pay the bills out there for our interview with Richard Ojeda about the subject of freedom, as well as we got to talk about some subjects of justice and security as well for our three-part series covering freedom, justice, and security. So everyone stick tuned. We'll be right back.
Thanks, y'all.
What's good, my fellow oligarchs? Today's episode is sponsored by the prison industrial complex, where slavery goes to live forever. Evil Jackie, want to let our elite company out there know the special deal that we have for them today from the fine folks of Legalized Domestic Violence?
Of course, Evil John. Use our code 13th Amendment for cheap labor today. Our work includes Starbucks packaging, Victoria's Secret lingerie, McDonald's frozen patties, and so much more.
Our investors frickin' love prison labor. So come, lock in this opportunity with promo code 13th Amendment for a truly captivated workforce that's ready to make you money. Okay, and now for our interview with Richard Ojeda. Okay, we are here now with our guest, Richard Ojeda. He is a former U.S. Army major, as well as having previously served in the 7th District of West Virginia, as well as running previously for several offices for Congress, as well as exploring for the presidency. Richard, welcome to the People's Basics.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. So, today we're recording on February 11th, and we wanted to have a conversation with Richard today about our themes of the day, which is freedom, justice, and security. And so, we got to go in depth ourselves of what those values really meant to us. And Richard, we'd love to ask you, what are some of those values when you think of freedom, justice, and security? What do you think we're trying to provide? Because I think these values get thrown out as really core to America, but they can mean so many different things to so many different people.
Well, I will tell you that for a person like myself who has lived in other countries and has spent, quite a lot of time in third world countries that do not have things like freedom, I tell you, it's something that, a lot of people in this country take it for granted. Because there are a lot of folks out there that don't have the rights, the privileges that we have in this country. And that's why, in other places, when people have to fight to get that, they hold it close to their heart. And here in America, where people are born into it, sadly, a lot of people don't realize how important that it really is and how something like that could absolutely be taken away. It's the way that it is. I mean, what we just saw with our nation being under attack, the insurrection on the 6th, I'm telling you right now, folks, we may not realize it, but we squeaked by a dictatorship. Because had Donald Trump been successful, we would be right now watching him solidify his dictatorship. And I'm telling you right now, it would be horrible. And the only way we would ever be able to take it back would be with blood.
That literally gave me chills because, we watched it the whole day. That totally gave me chills because we watched the insurrection day and it was, we couldn't believe we were watching this. And I keep telling my husband, hey, remember the other day when the president tried to overthrow the government? Like that happened.
Yeah. And I mean, it's amazing. And I'm, I'll tell you right now, I think that what has played out for the last 2 days has been very impressive. The House managers have absolutely knocked it out of the ballpark. But we also have to understand that it's probably not going to go anywhere. But people are not going to forget this. When you have Lindsey Graham and them that refuse to even be in the room and listen, I mean, how on earth can we even consider them to be actual jurors in what's supposed to be a trial? Yeah. And they don't even sit in the room, or they sit with their feet up on a desk reading a newspaper. But that's okay. People are going to remember this, and we're going to remind them about this fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Richard, one question I had is that there were many people who were involved in this. Obviously, in the past few days, we've been talking about the impeachment of Donald Trump and his involvement. But there were other people who also led this idea of the election being rigged and stolen. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what does accountability look like? Because I feel like a lot of the American people right now are feeling like people can just get away with crimes because it's blatant partisanship. We're going to have this great display of information of someone's involvement in inciting an insurrection, but then it's going to probably, as it happened in the House, likely be on pure partisan lines. What do you think accountability looks like?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I think that what's going to happen is Donald Trump's going to get away with this. But he's only going to get away with it because it's taking place on the Hill. Donald Trump he's never going to have a peaceful night of sleep again. They're going to go after Donald Trump for crimes that he has committed in the past. They're going to go after his finances. We know that Letitia James has got 67 different charges she's going to bring against him. We now know that Georgia has now filed charges against him for election, trying to basically, do away with a free and fair election. There's a lot of people out there that have participated in this that are going to have to be held accountable. When Dominion and Smartmatic finally hit the courts against Rudy Giuliani and these people, let me tell you something. We're talking about lawsuits that are going to be in the billions, and these people don't have it. And the thing is they don't have they can't combat that, because the truth is that we have them saying that when you voted for Trump, it automatically voted for Biden in the Dominion. They drug those companies through the garden, and those companies aren't going to sit back and take it. And I'm going to tell you right now, they're going to go after these people. And I want to see people like Rudy Giuliani. I want to see them penniless. I want them to friggin' live in a homeless shelter. I want them to hurt, because that's exactly what needs to happen. Because what they did, they attacked our democracy. This is going to be a stain on our democracy forever. You're going to hear 200 years from now in friggin' history books about the insurrection attack that tried to take this country over. And that's going to be, and that's their legacy. Everybody, when you get up, you look in the mirror, you have to ask yourself, what will your legacy be? And I'm telling you right now, there was a time when Rudy Giuliani's legacy was he was America's mayor. When the towers fell, he was the rock that everybody gathered around. And he has thrown that in the garbage to be a bootlicker for daggone Donald Trump. Him, Lindsey Graham, all of them. They've thrown their friggin' reputations in the trash to be bootlickers. And that's what they will forever be known as.
It's so true. I mean, I, as someone from New York, had remembered, frankly, Rudy Giuliani myself, having looked up to him as the recovery from 9/11, but to see him go so far in denying the absolute reality of this, and frankly, many other embarrassing moments along the way, is really, really terrible to see. But I wanted to ask you one thing. Like, obviously, there's been this enablement on multiple platforms. Tech has been a recent thing that a lot of people have been talking about, whether these social media platforms had a role in assisting this insurrection from platforming these people. What is your opinion on the nature of, like, the Twitters of the world and the Facebooks of the world deplatforming someone like Donald Trump from their platform?
I think that, they have to do what they did. I mean, I'll tell you, it's a shame that they waited. They waited until an insurrection before they finally said, you know what, this is absolute hate speech. Donald Trump is a child. He's a man-child. And you know what? When he was a child, he was a little bastard. If you read Mary Trump's book, it tells you, and you can tell, every time he lost, he was cheated. If a little girl didn't like him, she was fat and ugly. And that's how Donald Trump has lived his entire life. But I'm going to tell you right now, it is a shame that they have waited. They waited for a friggin' insurrection, an attack on our Capitol, before they finally stepped in and said, you know what, this is wrong. Donald Trump has been spewing hate speech for years. And when you are a political person, let's look at it like that. Let's say you have tiers in social media, and one of the tiers needs to be political. And if you are a person running for office, then you're on that tier. And there needs to be rules and regulations that you cannot, pass. Because Donald Trump should have been removed from social media years ago. He has done nothing but press hate. And I'm going to tell you, right now, we've got people that are facing decades in prison because they fell for Donald Trump. Now they're looking and they're saying, you know what? We fell for it. We didn't know. Donald Trump aimed the cannon at our Capitol and he fired it. And what's really messed up is that he fired that cannon. He told them, if you don't fight for your country, you're going to lose it. We can't be weak. He spoke about Vice President Pence and how they needed to go there and they needed to absolutely push him to do the right thing, which wasn't the right thing. But the thing about it was that literally about 2 hours after they attacked our Capitol, Donald Trump, the man who sent them to the Capitol, said, you are intruders and you will be prosecuted. What a absolute, I mean, can you imagine? And look, I have no pity for nobody that barged into that Capitol. None of them. I hope they all friggin' spend the rest of their life in prison. But you can only begin to imagine how hurt they must have felt that now they're facing decades in friggin' prison because they did what Donald Trump wanted them to do, and then Donald Trump turned on them and said, you are now intruders and you will be prosecuted. Wow. But once again, social media has to hold some daggone responsibility here. Zuckerberg and Twitter, they have to, because they're allowing these people to push hate speech, and we should not let nobody push hate speech, period.
So in relation to freedom and justice and security, there is that fine line between censorship and, which is like not freedom, but like also security, in that you shouldn't be able to incite a riot. So like
freedom of speech is, that's our First Amendment, freedom of speech. But you still cannot run into a movie theater and scream fire. There's certain things that you may have freedom of speech, but there has to be stipulations in there when you're talking about the loss of life. Donald Trump basically yelled fire in a daggone movie theater, and people died. And you know what? The people that Donald Trump hopped up on hate, Ashley Tabbitt was a Air Force veteran. Now, she was lost. She was lost in the sauce. But Donald Trump sent her, and she thought that she was going to save her country. And what she got was a bullet to the face, and lost her life.
Yeah. This is kind of off topic, but I do want to get your perspective as a veteran. Like, there were so many police and veterans and active duty that were like involved in the insurrection. It's just, that's just how many people there are.
Let me tell you. Those were people that made it to the ripe old rank of private first class. They never got the opportunity to friggin' see war face to face. And that's why they are the way that they are. That's why they act like they want some. Because make no mistake about it, if you've seen real combat, that's the last thing that you ever want to see ever again. So those friggin' jackaloons that were wearing all that friggin' gear and stuff like that thought they were looking like Braveheart for a day, let me tell you something. Those guys are friggin' worthless. And I hope the daggone police officers that were there, I hope that they lose their friggin' jobs, because they don't deserve to be there. Let me tell you something. You're going to storm our Capitol, and you're going to look to your right, and you're going to see a person that's got a shirt that says 6 million wasn't enough. And I don't want to hear the BS that the people are saying. It means 6 Marines, weapon and equipment. Bullshit. There's no such thing as a 6-man anything in the military. You chose to storm the Capitol with people waving rebel flags, racist friggin' toothless inbred assholes. And then you also daggone decided to storm the Capitol with people that absolutely were neo-Nazis. No. You lose your ability to claim patriot the moment that you did that. And every one of them, as far as I'm concerned, are garbage. And if you look and you pay attention to what some of these things that these people are doing and what they plan, I've watched people have communications talking about saving COVID spit in bottles to use as bombs. Yeah, I've seen that kind of garbage. I've watched some of these daggone texts that some of these people have sent to me, and I'm telling you, it's amazing. But these people are pure hate, and you know what? Like I said, they wasn't military, and if there was military, they didn't do anything. You might tell everybody you're all that in a bag of chips, but you probably sit behind a desk and did this instead of doing this. So you never got none.
So I have a question for you. Obviously, we do have a problem with some of our, people who are supposed to provide security to our nation, whether it be soldiers or police. There are bad actors within it that make the job of those who want to do good and protect our country a lot harder, and they don't face this level of accountability. I'd love to ask you, how do you think we can root out these hateful people who are occupying positions of authority like our military and our police?
Well, you know what? It's easy to see people that are racist. And people need to, but you got to have accountability. If I'm a police officer and you're a police officer and you're talking racial terms, you know what? I've got to deal with that. I've got to deal with that, because the truth is that if I allow you to be a racist cop, you're going to go someplace and you're going to set a fire that I may find myself in the middle of. And I can't accept that. People have to be accountable, not for them. You got to be accountable. And you know what? We've got to stop the things that go on in this country, the double standard that we see in this country, when a man can have a knee stuck on his neck for over 8 minutes that cuts off the blood to his brain and ends up killing him over the potential possibility of a forged $20 bill. But yet you've got white people come out there and are chasing the police with weapons, and the police are running away. An African-American gets shot because he moved his hands from the 10 to 2 to the 9 to 3. We got a double standard in this country, and it's got to stop. It's got to stop. I don't understand. That's one of the things about the military that I love, because you know what? We had to suffer. And when you serve in units like I served in, which are light airborne sapper battalions, you find yourself out there living in some of the worst conditions ever. And you find yourself in places like Afghanistan, where you're talking about, you literally thought you could freeze to death in some of these places. And you learn that no matter what the color of your skin is, if that guy and you together are all the warmth that you're going to get through the night, you got to deal with what you got to deal with. You learn how to put that shit in the past. And you learn how to daggone respect each other for what you bring to the table. I don't understand racism. It's horrible, and it's destroying this country. I don't have a problem with anybody because of the color of your skin, because of how you pray, because of who you love. Let me tell you something. I'd rather have a transgender person watching my back in a combat zone than somebody who don't want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things I'd love to ask is, how do you think we can help these kind of groups of people, like the veterans that we faced? Obviously, we were just referencing before that there were some in there. One died from the occurrence. I'd love to ask you, how do you think we need to be better helping our veterans? Because I think a lot of people, more on the progressive and the Democratic side, we don't get to talk about enough. How do we help people recover? And they are some of the people who need the most help. They are some of our highest homeless populations. There's a lot of mental health issues that come from suffering from war. How do you think we can better help our veterans, Richard?
Well, I think this is an issue, and it's been an issue. Veteran suicide, 22 veterans are committing suicide every day. There's a lot of things. There's one thing that I've always tried to do. When I was a state senator, I made West Virginia the 29th state to become legal for medical cannabis. Let me tell you something. I still, to this day, and I will do everything in my power here in the near future to be walking the halls of Congress, because I'm going to. And I'm going to try to see if we can allow the VA administration the ability to be able to push cannabis to veterans. I don't care if your state says cannabis is illegal. If you are a veteran and you suffer from PTSD, I want the VA to override your state's laws and still be able to give cannabis to that veteran, to keep that veteran from being one of 22 that commit suicide every day in this country. We know for a fact that cannabis is a non-addictive form of pain management, and we have serious problems in this country with veterans that are struggling with PTSD. Let me tell you something. When I was fighting to get my bill passed, I gave a speech and I held up 13 dog tags. And these are 13 dog tags of people that I know that didn't make it home. They died in combat. And I said, cannabis cannot save these people, but cannabis can help the people that see their faces every time they close their eyes. And that's exactly what it is. And that's one of the things that I think is one of the most important things that we can do for our veterans in this country, to give them the ability to not have to find themselves stuck on opioids, and to give them the ability to be able to calm themselves down whenever they find triggers. Fact.
Yeah,
now I love
think
you
that
even more.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I think it's something that a lot
You
of
got
people
me,
don't
man.
think of directly, but it's so true that we need these alternative methods that can allow it, and it makes no sense to criminalize it. It's one of those things where I think this is truly something that should be a freedom issue as well as a security. It's healthcare for people, and it's making sure that they have the freedom to do what they want with their own body. I have never understood why we would try and police on drugs like this.
No, you're spot on right. But you know what? It's not just that. It's not even just veterans. It amazes me how we continue to act like we're the greatest country on earth, that we're the best in everything. The only thing that we're the best in is we can whip anyone's ass. That's it.
And imprison people.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're first in. But why? Well, tell me something. Why can't we offer what other countries offer? Why do we have to make it to where if you want to get an education in this country, you've got to basically sign your name on the dotted line and promise that you're going to be bogged down in debt for the next 30 years? I spent 4 years in the classroom after I retired from the military, and I spent side by side with teachers, school service personnel, and I watched good teachers that taught English, world culture, science leave the profession. They left the profession to go work on a pipeline. Because why? Because the pipeline paid them decent wages that could help them get out of debt.
Yeah.
Because being a teacher and being bogged down in debt from student debt, they were going to be in their 50s before they paid their debt off. You know, they got kids. They want to buy their kids cars when they're 16 years old. They want to buy their kids nice clothes for school. But instead, teachers are struggling in this country because we don't care about them. And we don't have a problem allowing these companies that do the student debt to absolutely just get away with everything, you know, because that's the people who grease the pockets of our legislators and buy themselves their protection. When are we going to have people in Washington, D.C. that say, stop, I'm for the people?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
the
think
people
that's
need
so
a
true.
lobby.
Yeah, the people need a lobby. Absolutely. And there's good lobbyists out there. But the problem is that how can you compete with big pharma and big energy? You know, we've got people right now, when I see Native Americans taking a knee because they're trying to block a pipeline, and I watch police officers walk up and down the lines, spraying them in their face, and all they're wanting to do is protect their water source. You know, it amazes me how we allow that to happen. And the reason why is because those Native Americans can't come up with enough money to grease the pockets of legislators and combat the money that big energy gives. When I was a state senator, they wanted me to vote yes on a bill that allowed gas companies, to come onto your property and steal your resources and then shoot lines to the side and steal the resources of your neighbors, and nobody got nothing but them. And I said no. And you know what? It was 3 people, and one of them was a very beautiful young lady, and she said nothing the entire time until I finally said, guys, I'm not voting for it. And then she says, is there anything that I can do that could change your mind? And I said, you can get your ass up and y'all can get out of my office. And let me tell you something. How many people said, well, maybe this, maybe that?
Yeah.
You know, big energy, big pharma are they're the biggest dangers to this country. We lose more lives every year to opioids than all of the lives lost during the Vietnam War. And we've done that for the last 5 years. Who's the enemy here? I can take you 20 minutes from my house and take you to a community that has 300 people. 9 million pain pills through a pharmacy that's the size of your bathroom. Let that sink in. That's a problem. We can't combat these people.
Yeah.
So you're saying security could be, we could do security by getting money out of politics. That would secure a lot of things.
Well, absolutely. You know, overturning Citizens United that says basically corporations and free speech, money is free speech. These are things that we have to be able to attack. And the thing is that, you know, here's the problem, is that Democrats all say, I'm not taking corporate PAC money, which is a good thing. Don't take corporate PAC money. But, you know, nobody donates to them. So in the end, the Republicans that take that corporate PAC money and that dark money, and they take from ALEC and all these other organizations, they can drown out the Democrat every time. And it's absolutely brutal because at the end of the day, we are the ones that have the ideas that are going to help this country, but we keep getting shut down. Because why? Because we can't combat the money that comes in that goes against each and every one of us. Let me tell you something. I did everything right in 2018. I answered every question. I did open town halls. I did nightly lives every night. I said, I want to give you better access to me than a lobbyist. And I did everything that I could. And, you know, I got beat by a woman that did not speak to the news, did not speak to the newspapers, did not answer questions, had no town halls, and she just did a video that said, I'll do whatever Donald Trump wants. She won. She won. You know, and it's like, and let me tell you something. She has done nothing except read 2 pieces of paper. They just reelected her. You know, her family owns 5 car dealers, and all 5 car dealerships got a PPP loan each between $350,000 and $1 million each. And these people reelected her.
Jesus.
Are you trying to make my head explode?
Yeah, but see, that's the problem. That's the problem. Everybody's heads needs to start exploding, and people need to get sick and tired of this shit. You know, people, it's brutal when people are struggling. I live in a state that is dying. It's dying. I'm leaving this state. I've got to leave this state because I can no longer sit here and fight for people that continue voting against their best interests. The Republicans dragged these teachers through the garden. It was my speech that started the teacher strike in 2018 that went across the country. And let me tell you something. I would have bet my life that we were going to defeat every one of those Republicans. The teachers come up with a grading scale, and I got an A+, and all the Republicans got Fs. And guess what happened? They reelected every friggin' Republican, and we lost Democrat seats. The Democrats that fought for them didn't get elected, and they reelected the Republicans. And guess what happened? The Republicans, the very next session, pushed charter schools. And no teachers want charter schools. And guess what? They just reelected every one of them. And now the new bill that come out today, because today was the first day of the legislative session in West Virginia, now they just pushed a bill that said if you're a teacher and you strike, you're fired. Wow. So you don't have a voice anymore. You can't speak up because if you do, you're gone.
So, Richard, I'd love to ask you, obviously, West Virginia at one point actually was a Democratic state. Yep. We still have a senator there, Joe Manchin, who is a Democrat. Yep. I want to ask you, why do you think there is this disconnect right now in West Virginia? Because you are absolutely right. Paula Jean Swearingen came on our program, great candidate like yourself. How are we not resonating with them?
Let me tell you something. First and foremost, you know, the Democrats ran this state for 88 years. Do you want to know why they lost? Because they sucked. Because the Democrats were no different than the friggin' Republican. We had a guy that was a Democrat congressman for 38 years in the 3rd Congressional District, Ray Hall. Let me tell you something. Ray Hall never come around and talked to these people. He showed up 3 days before the election and wrote 3 checks to the 3 biggest crooks, and they friggin' reelected him. That's all it was. You know, the Democrats were no different than the Republicans. It was all about what they could put in their pockets. They didn't do nothing for nobody. West Virginia struggled greatly, and they continue to struggle greatly.
Yeah, my dad is kind of disengaged from politics because he says it's just a way for people to enrich themselves. He used to be a police officer in Houston. He would see these, deals go down. He would see like somebody get a tip or a donation of land, and then come to find out that piece of land was going to be used for something big, and they made a killing off of it. So, you know,
there's so many ways. Yeah, there's so many ways that you can spot corruption. You know, I live in an area that my county, the school superintendent is in prison right now because she took all of the computers and laptops that were supposed to be for the kids, and she sold them on eBay. You know, that's the kind of garbage that we see around here. The Board of Education, the state road, these are ways that these people rob this place. I mean, they just rob it blind, and nobody really stands up. I'll tell you this. For 2 years, when I was a state senator, I sat in meetings with FBI agents about state road theft. And I'm talking about a tractor sitting on the top of the mountain for 10 years that had a tree growing through the engine block. And somebody got paid monthly rent on that friggin' tractor. A big old piece of equipment would get put on the top of the mountain about once a month, and then they would go siphon the gas out of it for their personal stuff. And I watched in meetings with FBI agents. And let me tell you something. They were getting ready to crush these people, and it would have took about 50 people down. Guess what happened? I don't know if Donald Trump did it, but I do know that it takes somebody over the freaking governor to shut down an FBI investigation. The woman that beat me, Carol Miller, the state road, paved the road to her farm. And let me tell you something. Donald Trump come down here to Huntington, West Virginia to campaign against me, and that whole entire investigation got turned off. And the FBI agent, whose name was Jim Lafferty, actually friggin' said it would have took somebody over the governor to shut that down. And I believe that was also part of what helped me get beat. And I say what I say. And if anybody don't like it, I don't know if can I cuss on here?
Oh yeah.
They can fuck themselves if they don't like it. I say what I say, and they can kiss my ass. And everything that I say, I can back up.
So, Richard, the final question that I have for you is, obviously, I know you said you're not necessarily going to stay, but I think some people are going to have to stay behind to hopefully somehow salvage that state. You started No Dems Left Behind, and I wanted to hear a little bit more of the philosophy of how you're trying to do rural outreach through that. We've gotten to talk to a couple of your candidates in the past, like Blair Walsingham, Mia Mason, Natalie Klein, and Adam Christensen. Can you tell us a little bit more about the philosophy of that organization?
Well, what we're going to do right now is we're now reaching out to people. We're asking people, you know your area better than I know your area. So I'm asking you to find me a candidate that you believe could run and win and flip a red seat blue. And then I'm going to get that from you, and I'm going to do my research. And if I like what I see, we're going to put some money behind those people. We're going to figure out how we can help them flip those red seats blue. And I'll be honest with you, it wasn't easy, especially being a brand new organization. We didn't flip any seats, but we sure did bring out some amazing candidates. Adam Christensen was phenomenal. Blair Walsingham, Lindsey Simmons, Tom Palzowicz, Devin Pandy. We had some amazing candidates. And you know what? We didn't win. But I'll tell you what, some of those people are going to run for re-election. They're going to run a second time. And we believe that some of them may have the ability to just do it. So we're going to get behind them, and we're going to try to help them. We want to flip red seats blue. We want to be a thorn in the sides of people like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. We're focusing just on House seats. Now we're thinking about going after some U.S. Senate seats. Why not? And as long as people back us and will support us, we believe that we will absolutely be able to help flip some of these seats from red to blue. And I'd love nothing more than to tell somebody like Josh Hawley to pack your shit and get out.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I can relate myself. We got to interview 50 candidates on the program in 2020, and unfortunately, none of them prevailed. But I think a lot of these candidates have done good in their area, even when they don't win. When you move the margins, you're starting to move them on the policies, and we can start to get them in future elections, hopefully. And I think you're absolutely right. Some of these people are going to run again. We've heard that ourselves from some of the guests we have had on recently. So we are really hoping they prevail. Go ahead.
Well, it's not easy when you run for office. Yeah. And, it's a lot of work. You got to get out there. You got to knock on doors. You got to make phone calls. But people that have ran before, especially people that have ran in congressional races, and especially our candidates, they worked their butts off, but they met a lot of people. And, they only got 35% of the vote. But when you look at it like that and you realize now they're known by everybody, all they got to get's another 16%, and they flip a red seat blue.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And you know what? I think that we're going to see a lot of second-year candidates persevere. I'd love to ask you, what do you think are the best ways that our surrounding organizations can help these? Is it just amplification, or what do you think that they need to run better campaigns, in your opinion?
Well, ultimately, sadly, it takes a lot of money. So helping people financially is a big deal, but also pushing their message, elevating their profile, reaching out to other people and saying, hey, do you know this person? Because if you take the time to listen to what this person says, you're going to like what you see. A lot of people don't understand that. And of course, the Republicans, they're going to try to drown the candidates out with money. They're going to try to buy every billboard, every radio ad, and all that stuff first. And that's why a lot of these people, it's hard to beat. Here's another thing, too. Going after Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, you may think, who likes those people? But they have an amazing speech. Mitch McConnell says, I'm the senior person in the Senate. If you get rid of me and replace me with Amy McGrath, she starts at the bottom. Lindsey Graham said, I'm the chair of the Judiciary Committee. If you get rid of me, the person who wins starts at the bottom. So stop wasting your money on those people. When they've been there for daggone 40, 50 years, they ain't going nowhere. Don't waste your money there. waste your money, or not waste your money, but use your money in other areas so that we can take them out of the majority. We barely squeaked by, and now we are 50-50 with Kamala Harris being the tiebreaker. But let me tell you something. In this next race, in 2 years, there's at least 20 members running for Senate, and I'm telling you, there's at least 5 or 6 of them that I believe we absolutely can easily flip. I'll tell you right now, if Tim Ryan throws his hat and runs for Senate, he's going to flip one of those seats from red to blue in Ohio, and I'm going to back the shit out of Tim because Tim's my friend. And I'm going to tell you, you know, if we can start increasing that, then we can finally tell Lindsey Graham, get your ass to the back of the room. I don't want it to be 50-51. I want it to be friggin' 40, to be 60-40, 75-25. I want to get to the way that the Republicans are, where we can look at them and we can say, we don't give a shit what you think, because we got the power and you can take your ass to the back of the room.
And we could tell, frankly, some of the Democrats who aren't on board with the agenda that we need to get out of the way too. Because it's not just all the Republicans. We need the Democrats who actually are standing for the people to finally have a voice and have a little margin to be able to deal with some of those other ones.
Spot on.
So I have a question. It's not, I shouldn't be smiling, but my representative, Texas 6, Ron Wright, just passed from COVID on Sunday. And we're going to have a special election. Like, how can we in Texas, it's really kind of, I mean, it's so gerrymandered, because if it was just like the city, it would be blue, but they put all this rural area in there. So there's a lot of red area. So
well, first and foremost, I don't understand how they can do an election. He was a Republican that died. Technically, the Republican Party should be the ones selecting who's going to replace him.
I think there's going to be a special election. I've been reading about it.
It may be a special election, but it honestly, I would love nothing more to see a Democrat win it. But on a special election, the Republicans own the seat. And when he died, the Republican, technically, it should be a special election, but it should only be a special election from the people that the Republicans select to be in the race.
Got it.
Yeah, I honestly.
Well, then for 2022.
Do what?
Okay, then for 2022, how do we get where we're in, especially for us that are kind of on the bubble of, you know, Texas, almost, we were so close going blue. Like, how do we, you know, like you just went over it, money, but like, and amplifying and stuff, but like, what can we do ground to like push it over the edge?
First and foremost, find the person now. Don't wait till the election. Find the person right now and start helping that person magnify their voice around. Go ahead and have them go ahead and put their platform together. Work with them on their platform and then share that platform. Because if people start to know who this guy is, when it's election time, they're going to go, I recognize that guy's name. That guy who, or that man or woman who runs, they need to start running now. Don't wait until the campaign time. They need to be giving speeches right now where they stand. They need to do, let me tell you something, social media. You have a person, you're never going to see a Republican do a every night social media thing and answer questions, because Republicans don't do that, because Republicans know that the moment you ask them a question about money, they're going to be like, oh shit, I don't want to tell these people I'm getting it from the NRA. You see what I'm saying? So you get the person now to start doing live videos and you let them say, I'm doing this every night, and I just want to answer any question that anybody throws at me, because first off, I'm not going to duck questions when they come at me. And number two, why the hell should a friggin' lobbyist have better access to me than the constituents that I'm representing? So therefore, what I'm doing, I want to make sure you guys know you're going to have somebody. And when I win, I'm going to continue doing this from the friggin' damn office in Washington, D.C. And that right there will make a lot of people go, that's what I want to see, because you don't see it with the Republicans.
Yeah, it's so true. So, Richard, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us. Do you have any final things that you want the people who have heard today to be able to go check out that they've been hearing about, you know, No Dems Left Behind or other causes you're working on? How can they get involved?
Go to nodemleftbehind.com. Follow us there. Follow us on social media. Follow me, Richard Ojeda. It's Ojeda4, number 4 America on Twitter. I have the Airborne podcast on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to that page. And, of course, every night at 6:30, I do a live video from my Facebook. You know, like I said, sometimes it gets kind of rough, because like I said, if you get on and you want to argue, we can do it. But yeah, I just, I like to, I say what I say, and if you don't like it, tough shit.
Well, we loved hearing you today. So, Richard, thank you so much for being able to come on the program today.
Hey, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Oh, well,
Hey,
everyone.
we're just going to air.
We expect this is going to air in 4 weeks from today, so it'll be like March 11th, hypothetically. I have to check a calendar specifically.
Well, send me the info before so I can go ahead and advertise for it, okay?
Yeah, and we really appreciate that. With everyone else out there, we just want to let everyone know to stay basic out there. We really appreciate the conversation. Richard, thank you for stopping by, man.
Thanks. Bye.
A rose by any other name still advocates just as sweet. Rosebuds, the hill of roses is no more. We are now the people's basics. In the coming months, we'll be rolling out a new website, our comic series, and rewards to help support our new startup, media, and technology venture. In the meantime, check out our new podcast, The People's Basics, with hosts Jackie Sawicki and I, Jonathan Munitz, where we'll be breaking down a different societal basic each week with our friends, colleagues, and experts. Join us, and let's get back to the universal basics. Please help us by appeasing the algorithm gods with a like, share, subscribe, and hitting that bell today. Stay basic, my friends.